This week, Bonnie Halper joins us from StartupOneStop to talk about all things startups. Very excited about the forthcoming conversation. Let's see, in the startup and security notes of interest, how AWS changed the way VCs fund startups. And there's more articles that I skipped over. Hold on. No, this is really the articles. How to become insanely well connected. A self-made millionaire. Don't start your own business unless you have this trait. Why companies are not startups. The 24-month journey to product market fit. And startups in youth. Except research shows that most people are innovative when they're older, which is good news for me because I classify myself as older now, I guess. Signify D, Ativo Network, Signal Sciences, and CyberArk are in our startup notes of interest, which is what I mixed up earlier. Also, our journeys, some exciting things in Michael's journey, and some product updates in my journey. All that and more on to this edition of Startup Security Weekly. This is Security Weekly, for security professionals, by security professionals. Broadcasting live from G-Unit Studios in Rhode Island, it's the show about security startups, how to secure your startup, and advice for security startups. It's Startup Security Weekly.
I need it from the top.
Brought to you by, do you have a website, an external presence, employees, an office? Any of these things can be compromised and attacked. How are you defending these assets? Have you penetration tested these public assets? Start 2017 by taking a proactive approach to securing your vulnerable areas. Black Hills Information Security has been helping companies find their weaknesses since 2008. Email consulting@blackhillsinfosec.com and see how they can help you sleep better at night. Gain control of cyber risk with Tenable.io, the first vulnerability management platform built for today's elastic assets like cloud, containers, and web apps. Discover a fresh, asset-based approach that prioritizes vulnerabilities while seamlessly integrating into your environment. And improve ROI with the first elastic licensing approach based on assets, not IP addresses. Tenable.io delivers the data and context you need to secure your elastic attack surface. Start your free Tenable.io trial today by visiting Tenable.io. Welcome, everyone, to Startup Security Weekly. I'm your host, Paul Asadorian. I'm here live in G-Unit Studios today. Got all kinds of things going on. My illustrious host on the lines via Skype, temporary beach bum, Mr. Michael Santarcangelo. How you doing, Michael?
I'm good, man. Temporary. I'm going to enjoy it while we got it. It's a summertime, so it's a good time to be a beach bum.
Nice.
And then, we're gonna make it to a bigger city.
You know, it's interesting, Michael. I'm, as you know, very much a nerd and audiophile, and I think that's one of the things that interests me in doing podcasts. So much so that we have a whole network now. And I love headphones. I never quite took the plunge into like really high end headphones, and I did, and it got me thinking a lot about pricing and value and all those kinds of things. So at some point in the show, we should talk about that. Plus, I love talking about my new headphones and the audio stuff. But I think it's a great thing to discuss here in the show. It kind of changed the way I the perceived value and all those things about value and price. So
yeah, I think that's instructive. I always like talking about those things.
Absolutely. Michael, do you want to go ahead and introduce our interview, very special guest that we have here on the show today?
Yeah, I'm excited. So Bonnie Halper is joining us. Bonnie and I met a couple years ago. We were at a Dell event, and it was like one of those, you're sitting there with cocktails, and walked up, introduced herself, and I don't think I stopped laughing the whole time she hung out, and we've just kind of stayed friends ever since. But so here's why I was really excited to get her on the show. Bonnie's been around the startup community and technology, including things around security, even though she feels a little self-conscious about it. She knows more than most people that you and I talk to. And she writes a newsletter, StartupOneStop, and it comes out about once a week. And it's like one of those must-reads. Like you get it, you look forward to it, you laugh, you read it. She takes great opinion in it and defends it and writes it well. It's like one of those, oh, it's not a fluff piece, it's really good. And so I thought, this is perfect. Now she's got a lot more. You come to the wiki, you can look at all the stuff she's done in her bio. She's actually quite impressive on a lot of levels. But it's the writing, it's her command of it, the way she connects all those dots together. And I thought, gosh, for a show trying to connect all the dots together, we need to get Bonnie on. And so with that, Bonnie, welcome to Startup Security Weekly.
Oh, thanks for having me, guys. What do you want to know?
It's interesting, Bonnie. Michael talks about your writing and how he's very impressed with your writing. And you don't often hear Michael and myself praising people for their writing. Is it becoming a lost art, and how important is it today, especially in the startup world, to use writing to communicate your thoughts and ideas correctly? Because we see it poorly, and I think social media has done some damage there.
You know what really gets me is that everybody communicates through words, and writers are so undervalued. Even a lot of the publications, they'll hire interns. An intern doesn't have the experience.
Right.
They haven't written as long as I have, and they don't have the vision, and they're not thinking. They're not researching the way a real writer will. They're not going to question things. Usually, they'll just send out a few questions, have somebody answer them, and then write a piece. That's not how you write.
And we see that so often today. It's kind of disappointing.
I know.
Yeah,
that's what gets me about the tech press too.
Yes.
Well, and that's one of the things that I like about Bonnie's writing is that when you read it, she'll throw out something people are looking at, and then Bonnie, you're like, yeah, but that's not really how it works. Here's how it really works, and here's why. And you can tell that you're coming from a place of authority, but it's not condescending either. It's fun, sometimes snarky, but obviously Paul and I are going to be fans of that. A lot of other people are too. So I hope people get a chance to check that out. I know you've been around a lot in terms of the startup. Maybe. What are you seeing are some trends right now that either have you excited or some trends that you're just paying attention to? You don't know yet whether they're good, bad, or indifferent, but they just are. How are things shifting and changing from like just a broader startup ecosystem right now when we look at tech?
Oh, I'm glad that we're getting over that app phase and the social media phase. I like real tech. I was at the DLD conference yesterday, and I was talking to a couple guys who were talking about the next wave, which is devices being identified, not through passwords and the person, but through devices. That level of security. I look forward to that.
I do too, and it's interesting. I spoke with a data scientist about that, and is a very talented individual, and he was actually highly skeptical. And you think someone in his field would be like, no, we could totally do that. He was like, it might play out, it might not, kind of was his opinion on that. But I agree. I do think that's exciting when we talk about authentication.
It's totally doable because I know guys who are already doing it. I was talking to them yesterday. And yes, I am going to introduce them to investors because that's very important to me, that they get the technology out there.
So when you look at that, when you say that we're moving away from just doing apps and social media, is that kind of like getting away from ideas and this whole notion of just get subscribers, just get traction, just get your name out there to go solve real problems that you can demonstrate that create value? Or am I oversimplifying and editorializing it myself?
Oh, I'm just so tired of the me web. Everybody's a star. Everybody's got how many followers? Everybody's got 10,000 friends. No, you don't. You really don't. That's a problem because people don't know what real friends are anymore. I'm like, you have friendlies. You don't even know if they're real. How many of those things are bots? Ask Facebook. Ask USA Today.
That's an interesting point.
And it's really interesting. You were talking before the show, Bonnie, about the importance of meeting people in person. And I can't underscore that enough. And I think, through social media and things that hold us back from traveling, like Michael and I have children, which also often makes it tough. So we have to make hard decisions about where we network. But when I started doing that this year, my son's a year old, so I really cut back my travel. And then this year I started going to conferences and talking to people. And it's amazing the level of communication that you can have when you actually sit down and just talk to people. And it's amazing what that does for business. What advice do you have for startups to do that level of in-person networking? Because I feel like when you do a startup, you do a lot of your communicating over the internet and social media. But where is your advice for security startups, say, to start networking with people?
Well, it's important to go to conferences, and it's important to go to listen to what the investors or whoever is speaking at the time on the panel say. But, people forget that these are people too. I wanted to talk to Dave McClure, who was speaking at TechCrunch Disrupt a couple of years ago, and I've met Dave before, but, and all of a sudden they whisk him off for the photo ops and this and that and private interviews. And I know that Dave smokes. So I went outside and I just waited. I'm like, just wait till he comes out for a cigarette, which he did. And everybody, there were a ton of people outside smoking. And Dave just sits down, and he had just come off of speaking. And I know that all those people are lining up trying to speak to him. So there he was sitting on the step just by himself. So I sat down next to him. We had a long conversation. I'm like, they don't even know who it is. They don't even recognize him if he's not on stage. They drink coffee. They have lunch. That's where you find them when they're being human, not when 10,000 other people are trying to talk to them.
And then when you do that, so it's interesting. Paul and I looked at a story last week that kind of said something similar, and it was from an investor, and she said, "You know what? It's crap. Like there's only a certain way and a certain time to pitch me." She's like, "If I've got unstructured time, don't waste my time. Don't be a jerk to me. Don't be obnoxious." So, and what you're saying is recognize that they're a human and be a human, and then kind of see where that goes. Or when you have that, do you then try to create a connection for a follow up, or what do you do in that space? Just let it be and enjoy the moment, or how do you convert it to something else?
Have a real conversation. Don't start pitching them. They'll instantly shut down. They don't know you. You don't know them. They want to know who you are. Remember how they always say that it's all about the team and blah, blah, blah. But they want to know that it's a person. Remember, you're going to have to be working with this person. They're going to have to be working with you. So they want to know who you are first. If you like each other, maybe they'll follow up with you. Maybe they'll ask you to follow up. But don't just launch right into it. Be a person. Approach them as if you're a person.
And I can say in my own experience, what Bonnie's recommending absolutely works. It works. We went to a conference in Boston. We had bourbon in the booth. I didn't know this gentleman that came up. Turns out he was a CISO for a pretty large organization. He told me that pretty early on. I'm like, dude, just sit down, have a glass of bourbon with me. He's like, I was just in a 2-hour meeting. I'm like, dude, sit down, have a glass of bourbon. Let's just talk.
2 glasses.
Yeah, I didn't talk about my startup at all. But you know what? He contacted me. He's like, hey, so I want to hear about what you got going on over there. I said nothing about my startup. We just talked. So Bonnie, it absolutely, a testament. There's an example of it working. So
that's how I met Dave McClure. I was at a the Web Summit they had an event in New York, and it was invitation only, and you had to stay the whole day. And it was the end of the day, and I was all talked out, and I was exhausted. So I found a table in the corner by myself, and this guy comes over and he says, "Do you mind if I join you?" I said, "Nah, I'm so networked out." Then he said, "What are you drinking?" I said, "Tequila." So he came back with the bottle, and that was Dave McClure. And we were just sitting there doing shots by ourselves. Had a good time.
that's awesome.
That's actually pretty cool. So how do you decide then which conferences to go to, and how do you have any thoughts on how many is too many, or how many is not enough, or I don't know, how do you take a look at it, both in terms of the cost or the time or the being away or any of the other pieces? How do you balance that out?
Oh God, that's always tough. You always want to know who's going to be there, not just the speakers. The speakers are important, but the attendees too. Always check that out. And one piece of advice, the mistake that everybody always makes, I know LinkedIn is out there and you can reach out to people and blah, blah, blah. Or you meet somebody and you want to follow up with them. Never ask them to meet you for coffee. Everybody says that, and they hate that. Come up with something else. One of my favorite stories is Avner Ronin. I don't know if you remember who he is. He had a company called Boxy. And Boxy, Avner focused on one investor, and that was Fred Wilson. He said, I'm going to have Fred invest. Fred is a Union Square Ventures, very successful investor. So Avner met Fred, and Fred invited him to come in and pitch, and Fred said, no, not interested. So what Avner did was every single month, he would send Fred a follow-up, and Fred would say no. But every single month, there was Avner's email, and 18 months later, Fred wrote the check. He was he kept updating him and updating him and updating him, and he got to yes. It doesn't, you're not going to launch a successful startup in 10 minutes, and it's not even going to take a year. I go to a lot of these demo days for accelerators. I mentor 3 accelerators, and I host breakfast every 2 weeks with one top investor and 20 entrepreneurs. And the investors are always talking about what a waste of time accelerators are, and yet they're all there at demo day. And, I cornered one of them, and I said, and yet here you are, because he had just spoken at one of my breakfasts. He said, I'm writing 3 checks today. I said, but you don't, they're a waste of time. He said, I'm writing 3 checks for 3 startups I met through this accelerator 3 years ago. So yeah, they pay attention, but you got to do a lot of work before you can get to them. And preferably you don't want to get to them at all, because I have a friend named, what's Steve's last name? Steven Messer, who was an investor and a very successful serial entrepreneur, who spoke. I invited him to speak one day, and he gave the best quote. He said, "You really don't want investors. You don't want their money. You've got better terms from the mafia." That's what he said.
That's interesting. That's really interesting. All right, so you're mentoring people in accelerators. What's the most asked question that you find that you need to keep answering, or the most surprising thing that you keep answering?
Oh God, that's a tough one. Okay, can you introduce me to some investors? You're not ready to meet them yet. It's fun. It's funny. I have this friend who I was hanging out with very recently who has a startup that has traction and it's profitable. She's married to a top investor. She would never take investor, or she doesn't take investor money. She knows better.
Bonnie,
The other thing they want. Oh, this is my favorite thing that they always want to know at the accelerators. It's startups in general. How do I get to the press? Can you introduce me to the press? I want to talk to the press. I want to get in the press. It's amazing that people have their decks and they have their pitches and they have their this. And I say to them, my first question: do you have a press release? They don't think about something like that. Mm-hmm. How are you going to get to the press if you don't have your story? You don't have your press release, and don't write a standard press release. Please do not write that boilerplate press. You're going to get here's a good hint for you. It's going to get you absolutely no press. This is what you do. You write the story for them. You write a story. That's how you get somebody's attention. Tell me a story. Everybody wants to hear a good story.
Yeah, I've limited it now. I only take 3 pitches a week. And what I find in my strategy has been get me excited, and I'll talk longer than 5 minutes. But by the way, if you start pitching me, I will intentionally, and I'll tell you, I'm going to knock you off your pitch. And it's funny, Paul, because what I say to a lot of people is, we're sitting down, we're having a glass of wine or some bourbon, and we're just talking. What gets you excited? And I got to tell you, there is some awesome stuff happening out there, but they get so watered down. The other thing too is if you just send me a form message to get the press, I'm not interested in writing about it. I don't care. And if you're expecting me to do extra work on top of all the stuff I'm already doing, yeah, I'm busy on that. So Bonnie, when you tell them a story, I mean, is it kind of like the way we would write headlines and the way we think about creating that lead and that initial hook, or?
Absolutely. You have to catch somebody. You have to get their attention. Oh, and another piece of advice. One thing that every single entrepreneur or startups make is, they read an article and they see that, oh, that writer just wrote about, or that reporter just wrote about that. And I'm doing that, so I should let them know. You know what? They just finished a story. They're not going to write about it again.
I get those all the time.
All the time.
Now, what I try to do if they're nice to me is I try to be nice back. So keep this in mind if you're a startup. If somebody writes back to you like me and says, you know what? I just covered it. Give me like 60 days, reach back out and show me an angle and we'll talk about it. Those that follow up with me 60 days later and then say, oh, and here's some tweaks and maybe we could take this angle with it, or I've got so-and-so and they believe this, that they tend to get attention. So just keep that in mind. If you do follow up with somebody and they're kind enough to say, wow, your timing sucks, don't get upset. Say, okay, when is a better time? What do you need? And then run that direction. I think that works a lot better.
So, Bonnie, what is some of your high-level advice for marketing for an early-stage startup? I'm curious, because we do marketing for organizations, and I've worked in the past year, try to understand what my advice would be, what programs would look like, and at what stage those happen. And I'm still confused.
That's a really hard one. You always have to be marketing. And another piece of advice, speaking of press and marketing and blah blah blah, find the bloggers who are covering what you do or who specialize in that, and get to know them. Become an expert. Become a source.
Yeah, if you become one of their sources, I like that.
Yep.
It's interesting. We have this thing on our network. We have sponsored segments, sponsored interviews. And then we have interviews that like, hey, if you've done something great for the community and you're sharing that and it's free, you can come on the show and talk about it because it benefits my listeners and there's no product or sales pitch attached to it. You just did something for the greater good. And that's actually how this podcast network got started. Is that in some of your advice for startups, and how do you recommend startups balance like what they give away for free and what they make into a product?
It's always good. I mean, of course, everybody wants that hockey stick growth and all the users are members or whatever that they can get. But remember, it's really hard to convert people from free to paying.
Well, yes.
That's always the trick.
Preaching to the choir.
Yeah.
No, that's a good point. It's a good point.
So Bonnie,
I lived that.
let's talk briefly about investors, because you're in New York City. Obviously, it's a hotbed for most things, and if you've lived or you're from New York, it's the center of the world. When you look at investors and you do breakfast with investors, and you've brought together women in investing, and you've brought together those things, what are some trends in investing that you see right now? Like, we're looking at exits are kind of shifting. There's a lot more M&A activity, a lot of private equity money's coming into play, things like that. So when you look at it, what are some of the things that you're noticing that you think are interesting for people in startups or people looking at security startups that you're seeing from actually sitting with and talking to investors on an exceptionally regular basis?
Exceptionally regular basis. What I noticed that, and it cuts both ways. You want to find an investor who specializes in your space, of course, and try to go to smaller events. That's why I host breakfast with one investor and 20 entrepreneurs. And I struck upon the idea when a friend of mine who's an investor was speaking he was just addressing a large room of entrepreneurs. There were 400 people in the room, and he saw me there, and there were like 50, 60 people waiting to talk to him afterwards. And he said, "Wait here, let's go get some tequila after I finish here." So I waited for him, and we were heading towards the nearest bar. And I said, "How many of those people are you going to remember tomorrow?" And he said, "Ask me how many I remember now." So try to go to smaller events. But, look at what their portfolio is. You might have something that's compatible with another company that they have. In fact, that happened the other night. Even I had a ladies who lead event with 100 women investors. I invite some men too, and I have volunteers, and I had this one volunteer, and she's really, really shy, and she is looking for investor money. And I started talking to her about what she was doing, and there were two investors standing there, and one of them leaned in and said, we love that space. We're talking to a company that's just starting out. How far along are you? And he's going to introduce them because they do want to put money into the space. And it looks like she might get an investor. So like I said, don't just dismiss them because they've already invested in something that is something similar to what you're doing. It might be a compatible company. They like to merge their companies as well. Does that help?
Oh, it does. Yeah, no, I'm processing. I mean, this is insights that I don't think a lot of people get and that they kind of figure out. But then what I'm also hearing from an undercurrent is it's not about always be ready to pitch and always be pitching and show up and be ready to list off facts. It sounds more like be able to tell the story, be able to be a human, be able to use some empathy and make some sort of a connection. And if you've got that connection, then you can talk about what you're doing, but it's not a pitch. It's talking about it and the problem you're trying to solve. So am I picking up on that properly?
Yes, because, in fact, I had a breakfast a couple of months ago, and there was somebody in the room, and he mentioned what he was doing. And, they're still rather early. And the investor happened to have seen what he was doing. He knows what he's doing. And the investor started asking him questions. And in fact, the investor, talked to him afterwards, and he said, "How much money?" He said, "I'm not looking for money." He was still building it, and the investor wanted to take it. He's already on his radar. Try to get on the radar as early as possible. Even if you're not looking for money, go to these things, meet them, talk to them, and tell them you're not ready yet. Like I said, that investor who was at the demo day was investing in 3 companies he'd met 3 years earlier, but he was following them. And if they are interested, keep them in the loop, follow up with them, and say, and tell them that you're going to do this. Don't just do this. Not looking for money yet. I will be, but if this is of interest to you, we'll just send you updates and do it like once a month or once every 6 weeks. Don't just say you're going to do it. Don't just come back a year later when you're ready. They're not going to remember you. They meet a lot of people, and they're looking at a lot of decks too. Oh, that's another thing. Never say that you're doing something that nobody else is doing, because trust me, at least 5 other people are doing it. At least, actually, at least five people in a 10-mile radius. Oh, and never post on Kickstarter, by the way. You know about this, right?
And investors aren't too fond of that, from my observations.
It's not only because investors aren't very fond of it, but they know that the Chinese developers are studying Kickstarter and just replicating those things.
Yep.
So by the time you get funded, it's already out in
Yeah,
China.
I was gonna say I've seen. I don't know if we covered it here. There's a couple stories that kind of go that way. Let me ask a question though. Just like I'm always interested in people that are good sources, both for this program or for the writing that I do. Do VCs then, in your experience, Bonnie, look for the same? Like somebody who's, I mean, I appreciate the whole. I'm not looking for insight yet. I'm not looking for money yet. But they like what you're doing and they want to stay on the radar. Is there a way then to be valuable to the investment community, to keep them abreast of trends and things, not to be a pain in the ass, maybe to be on the radar, but like what's useful? Because investors get pitched all the time. Like on one hand, their phone is probably always ringing off the hook, their email always overflowing. But is there something that's a little more signal to them than noise that they covet that's hard for them to get?
Well, that's why I said you should make yourself a source if possible, because investors, if they're investing in something and they don't know, maybe they need more information about that vertical. They're looking for sources. They're looking for industry experts. So, talk to the bloggers, get your name out there, become an industry expert, become a source for them. That's another good way to meet them.
For the VC. So basically
Yes.
go figure out what they're reading and the questions that they need answered and be the person who can give them those insights and answers.
Yeah, remember, VCs don't know everything. In fact,
You're shattering people today. No.
Oh, I'm
Stop.
sorry. And more than one investor at one of my breakfasts has said this. It's like one of my favorite quotes from Dave McClure: investors have the attention span of a gnat, and it's true. That's why you have to be able to get them instantly. And they read so many things. You have to be able to explain what you're doing to a 5-year-old. Make it really, really simple. Do not complicate it. Don't send 50,000 pages. Don't even send them 20 pages. They like white space. They like simple. They like direct. Don't complicate it. Keep it as simple as. Remember, you're talking to a 5-year-old with the attention span of a gnat, and it's true.
Do you have more advice when you send them that, monthly or quarterly update to your investors that you've started to build a relationship with? Like, what other things? How should you approach that communication?
Oh, just whatever. I mean, when you're sent, after you finish, as an Abner, Ronan, whatever they did that was successful, or even what didn't work, he would tell them, well, this didn't work, so now we're doing this. We pivoted, we're doing this, blah, blah, blah. He really kept him in the loop. He got his attention. He intrigued Fred. And he was persistent. And he is persistent. Mm-hmm. Persistence helps. It really does. In fact, I wrote a column once. And even when I was a kid, I thought that no was an acronym. Because, if you noticed, even when you're a kid, your parents would say no, N-O, no. When did they ever say yes, Y-E-S? They never, not once. Not one parent does that, and you're both parents. You know this, right? So I came to figure out, after not too long a time, that no is an acronym that stands for not ordinarily. So be persistent because, maybe you'll get to yes.
It works. Yes, no. It works with the kids sometimes too.
What?
Yeah.
They keep asking, and you say no. You keep asking, and they say no. And finally, you just get tired of saying no, and you're like, just all right. If you stop asking me, go have that or do that or whatever.
Well, it's funny, right? That's one of the things that I saw today, and it's interesting. Current, there was some quote like things you can learn from kids, right? Always be busy, be joyful about everything, and be absolutely persistent in whatever you want. And we know kids, like, they want it, they get it in their heads, they want it, they go after it, they go after it, they go after it. And Bonnie, you gave us a story about, updated Fred Wilson for 18 months. And we've always read stories of, showed up at the office every day, showed up at the interview every day. And I always look at that. And I think what I've started to realize is there's two ways to do it. There's the way that gets you arrested, and then there's the way that gets you the position. And I think the nuance is there's a way that you're doing it that's deferential but determined. And there's a way to do it because, you read it in a book and you heard us talk about it. And you're like, I get it. I will send them an email every day. But you're completely tone deaf and you're not really adding any value. And so they're not terribly excited about it.
It's funny, and I probably shouldn't share this story with you, but there's this young entrepreneur. A couple of years ago, who was raising funding. And he is absolutely dogged about it. He was talking to investors. He was at every breakfast. He was everywhere. Everywhere I was going, there he was talking to investors and talking. And he did raise his funding. And one of the investors was somebody I know rather well. And I was surprised that he had invested in it because it's not his usual sweet spot. And I said, I'm surprised you wrote the check. What made you do it? Why? Are you focusing on other areas and others? And he said, He was bothering me so much. I just wanted to get rid of him. So he wrote him. So he gave him 25,000 just to get rid of him. I don't recommend that. Don't do that. Do not try this at home.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, I agree. That's probably That's why I said like there's always a line when you get insights like this. But I think so far what I've heard from the themes is be able to tell a story, which obviously you're good at, Bonnie. And as a connector and looking at it, if people give you a good story, it makes it easier for you to make those connections and introductions. It makes it easier for them to understand. It's more memorable, and it comes back down to something that Paul and I talk a lot about here, which is you can have the greatest tech, but you've got to be able to go connect with people and help them understand why whatever you're doing is valuable. And what you're saying is, yeah, and that works at scale. It's just be a human and be a human with other people. And if there's a connection, then there's a connection. And if there's not, well, good news. There's a lot of other people out there.
Right. And another thing that entrepreneurs forget, they get the list of the top investors. Don't always talk to the top investors. Talk to other investors too. And when you're pitching, always start with the investor. Maybe start with the investor who you don't really want them to write the practice. Practice on investors who are not your top choices. Sorry, investors. You're not everybody's top choice, but different investors have focus on different areas. I was going to make another point. Yes, absolutely practice on those investors. I was going to make another point as well, and I forgot what it is. Oh, remember, you're going to be working with these people. They're going to be on your team. It's not that you're going to get the check, you walk away, success. No, that's when you really start working. But these people are going to be part of your company. They have a stake in your company. You have to don't just tell them about you. You find out about them. Interview them too, because you have to work with these people on an ongoing. It's like a marriage. It's done. And divorcing investors is not that easy, trust me. So you really want to get to know who they are and if you can work with them.
I think that makes a lot of sense, especially too, because we're seeing more people now. They're not just looking for the check, right? They're looking for the introductions. They're looking for the connections. They're looking for the guidance. They're looking for somebody to help them mature their processes and move from a concept to an actual company. And you got to like those people, or there's got to be a strategic connection.
That's right. And speaking of LinkedIn, find out some of the companies who they look at. Of course, you're going to look at who's in their portfolio, but go through LinkedIn. Find people who work in those companies, or especially if you can get to higher levels who are directly working with the investors, and ask them about the investors. Adeo used to have this thing where it rated investors and people gave feedback. He's not doing that anymore, but it's very important, and as are warm introductions. So if you find those people, and maybe you want to talk to them about what you're doing, and maybe they'll make the introduction to the investor. Investors love warm introductions.
Well, sure, because so do we, right? From a human nature perspective. Oh, it's a friend of Bonnie's. It's a friend of Paul's. Okay, great. I'll take that call. I'll have that chat. That's easy. I don't know who you are. I don't know why you're pitching me. I don't know what you want. I have no basis. Oh, I'm really busy. Please, I don't have time to people right now. So that makes a lot of sense. I dig it. I've been learning a lot about this. So it's been a lot of fun. And I'm really glad you got a chance to join us, Bonnie, because, these are the stories that people don't get a chance to hear, right? We're always regaled with that. Here's the very formal way your pitch should have exactly 7 slides and cover these 32 points. And, and I can tell, and look, Paul and I dissect that stuff all the time too. And what I always point out is, if I walk up to you and say, right, let's throw all that out, what do? You need to have an answer. And I'd like to hear that you're a little excited about it. Because if what you're doing is just something to make money and you don't really care, it's not really exciting for me either. So,
Bonnie, on a closing note, we talked about some of the dangers of investing. What is some of your top pieces of advice for bootstrap startups?
No, try to stay away from investor money. Make sure you have there's the product market fit. Yeah, it is very important, the product market. Make sure you better have customers, because that's your proof of concept. They want to know that people want it, that they're coming back for again and again and again. They're paying close attention to that. It means something. They always say team. And the team is important because they want to know that you're going to stick with it and the team is not going to fall apart. But they want to know that you have a good product, that you believe in your product, and that you're open to suggestions. Sometimes it was just, I gave a speech not too long ago about the early days of Silicon Alley and technology community in New York. And we had the on-demand economy. Everything that you see out there, social networks, they were all there. It might have been too early. They didn't get enough traction. It wasn't well enough thought out. But the investors were there too, and they know where those landmines are. So they might have some advice for you. You should listen to them. That's why I said you have to find the right investor as well. Who knows your space?
Good advice. Bonnie's website is StartupOneStop.com. Make sure you check it out, Bonnie. It was wonderful having you on Startup Security Weekly today. It was nice meeting you.
Oh, thank you. You guys too. It was a lot of fun. And hopefully I was able to help some of you entrepreneurs out there. And do not give up. And remember, some of the most successful entrepreneurs are over 40. And that's true.
Yes.
There you go. Yes.
Yes.
It's true.
Just barely over 40, but definitely over 40 in this camp. I forgot to read announcements, and I just wanted to mention before we end this segment, itpro.tv. Speaking of awesome companies and companies that are doing great things, itpro.tv's courses now include Apple Certified Support Professional, CompTIA, Security Plus, and ITIL Planning, Protection, and Optimization. Premium annual memberships include all video content as well as access to virtual labs and Q&A forums. The normal rates that you would pay if you don't listen to Security Weekly, is $85.70 a month or $857 per year. However, for a limited time, Security Weekly listeners get 30% off the lifetime of your active subscription using the code SW30. Thank you again, Bonnie. And with that, we're going to take a short break, come back, talk about the startup news. Stay tuned. Don't go anywhere.